There isn't much more significant to the daily life of New Yorkers than the New York City subway. Despite it not being a massive time commitment, it is something that can really make or break your day. And in today's video, we'll be talking about how a subway cancellation for some commuters meant something much darker that they would later find out. In addition, I'll take you with me to Ground Zero, where the Twin Towers once stood, and we'll take a look at the infrastructure that exists now. It was a pretty regular morning commute for most, especially for those just going south to the financial district using the one train. Little did MTA dispatchers know that a severe disruption would be happening soon. At 8:46 a.m., a plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Now, within a minute, they started evacuation of the subway system, but this was not because of the plane impact on the tower, but it is said that it was due to water damage. When the tower was hit, the tunnels below had a ton of emergency systems go off in the stations, and this meant that the place was just covered in water and it was rendered unusable. Due to the chaotic state of Lower Manhattan, where the towers were located, New York City subway service around that area was also heavily impaired, which thus bottlenecked the entire system, and we'll talk more about that later. Barely 15 minutes later, another plane hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center complex. At this point, people's minds were unraveling and everything was just going crazy, as this no longer looked like an accident. By 9:08, the Federal Aviation Administration banned all flights going through New York City airspace or landing in that area. This presumably put a strain on people-moving systems in airports nationwide due to the fact that a lot of passengers now have to go elsewhere. After the second tower was hit at 9:03, PATH really went into scramble mode, and the last PATH train departed the World Trade Center station at 9:11 a.m., with the station being entirely vacant, a great safety success. At 9:21, all bridges and tunnels into Manhattan were closed except for the George Washington, Brooklyn, and Manhattan bridges, and those bridges that were opened were used for evacuation. Surprisingly, New Jersey Transit continued its train service into New York Penn Station, which thankfully came out for the better, as it was used to help evacuate people from Manhattan. At 9:59 a.m., the second tower collapsed, and thus tons of closures followed. At 10:20 a.m., the New York City subway completely suspended all citywide service until the afternoon. Additionally, when subway service was renewed, a lot of the stations that ran earlier that day would not see service for quite some time. Now that we've gone over the timeline of events, let's take a brief overview of the destruction that was caused. By the way, if you do want to support the channel, I have some links in the description and a storefront that has some designs I think you might like. Anyways, back to the video. Now, to understand the immense destruction, we have to look at where the subway tunnels were. Well, just take a look at this. This is the PATH eastbound tunnel F, as far as I remember, and it is right under the World Trade Center. This was taken in 1969 when the place was under construction, so this just gives a glimpse into how integral rapid transit tunnels were to the complex. Over here, we can see an image of a station post 9/11. Firstly, you can notice the office items thrown everywhere. That could be debris from the Twin Towers. In addition, you can see just how thick the layers of dust were. Looking down here on Cortlandt Street, we can see how the roof caved in and is held up in some other spots. Here at World Trade Center, you can interestingly see how some parts of the station have held up, but still rendered unusable because of this roof caving in. But otherwise, you can even see things like the platforms and the ads intact, for the most part. Now, over here is an interesting photo because you can see how the bottom part, which are the tracks on the platform, are intact and the roof is intact. But just look at how much of a beating these load-bearing columns are taking. They are twisted like little trees. They just look like saplings lined up along these tracks. And it takes a lot of force to twist and crunch these slightly. So you can just see the impact that the subways felt beneath or even around the towers. Over here we can see a tunnel with flooding and pieces of structure everywhere. You can see the significant water damages that were done to the tunnels during the attacks. This scene here looking down the tunnel looks like something out of a construction zone or a mine shaft, not a subway tunnel. So you can see that the tunnels have collapsed in some parts and debris and soil just filled it up. Now that I've taken you through the debris, let's take a look at the New York City service changes and why they happened. Anyways, if you are wondering why a building falling down would impair the New York City subway so much, we have to take a look at the southern tip of Manhattan, which we are at right here. For context, this is Ground Zero, where the Twin Towers fell. Now you can see this pretty large rail junction terminus turnaround thing. This was the PATH train. As you can see, some rails run right underneath the World Trade Center, with even some being in the foundation or underneath the foundation of the building. Now, on the other hand, you have a ton of New York City subway infrastructure that is funneled through southern Manhattan. As you can see, a lot of the points and tunnels are around this area. So if something here fails, a lot of the subway system fails, which was evident here. Now, this is the platform of the 1 train, which goes down to South Ferry. All right, so right next to the World Trade Center, we don't only have the PATH infrastructure, but also vital subway infrastructure running through in very dense fashion. One right here, one that's just a block over, and then another one that's just another block over, and another block over. So with the towers collapsing and fractures in the ground and debris being thrown everywhere, you could expect these stations, especially these 3, to be heavily affected and damage continuing around the area. For example, there was a point where everything was closed south of Chambers Street, and with some damages even extending as far as here. So that's why the subway service was impaired so heavily, as you just had an integral part of the system sitting right below the towers. And that's not because they built it below the towers, but that's because when you're picking a site for the 2 world's tallest buildings, you want it to have good transit access. So they placed it in this area. Over here is the map for July 22nd of 2001, before the 9/11 incident happened. I'd like you to take a look at the lower left side of your screen. At Cortlandt Street is where the Twin Towers once stood. You'll notice going into September 17th that the N and R lines through the Montague Street Tunnel have been suspended, and the branch going to South Ferry on the 7th Avenue line has been suspended. Also, the 8th Avenue line going to World Trade Center also was suspended. 2 days later, you can see that 3 train service ceased around the city, along with a ton of temporary closed stations being added. This was pretty bad. On top of the Southern Financial District being subway inaccessible, now multiple other stations around Manhattan were also inaccessible. 2 days after that, you can also see how Chambers Street opened up for the 1 and 2, but was still closed for the 8th Avenue line, and Wall Street opened up, which brought some service back to the Financial District. Oddly enough as well, the C train had service restored on 72nd Street. Here you can see the services kind of getting back up on their feet, as only Park Place remained a closed station, and now Lower Manhattan had extra service, with Chambers Street opening up for the AC and E lines. Now this map has a lot of service changes, but one to note is that the N and R now run once again through the Montague Street Tunnel. In addition, Park Place reopened, and service was restored, and this really brought back service to Lower Manhattan. A note here is the expansion of the shuttle up to 4th Street, and the big one being the reconstruction of the Lower Manhattan branch of the 1 train, with construction starting on the section from Chambers Street down to South Ferry in hopes to restore original service. Barely 1 year after the tragedy, service was restored to Lower Manhattan, and the E-train finally stopped at the World Trade Center. However, service was not yet restored to Cortlandt Street, where the Twin Towers once stood, and this would be a long process. After multiple years' recovery and change of the city, World Trade Center Cortlandt Station finally opened with an entirely new complex, and that is what we will check out together. For context, the old station looks like this. The new Cortlandt Station boasts the United States Declaration of Independence and the UN Declaration of Human Rights. In addition, the old rolling stock that they rode back in 2001 still uses the station, which makes for an odd look. But also, you can see that there are many less pillars than before, and it boasts higher ceilings. Now, I couldn't find the specific construction cost for this station. It's probably out there somewhere, but the complex itself was north of $3 billion US, and that's a lot of cash. Overall though, the subway station is done up really nicely, and it really does deserve such a nice station, as this is a place of US historic, importance, and the fact that there is a beautiful new tower here. Let's take a look at the new Oculus. This is the Oculus Transport Hub, the newest train station
one of the newest train stations in New York. It has a connection to the 1 train and to the Port Authority Trans-Hudson. And then above it is the World Trade Center.
The touch of the extra viewing platforms really does well for the station, especially given how vertical in nature it is, and the lack of pillars and obstructions making it perfect for viewing. The structure is also less vertical above ground, simply due to the fact that the actual ground level is deep below ground. The sleek skylight at the top lets in a lot of natural light and softens the look a bit, making it look not as intimidating and more like you're in some kind of futuristic space hub. In addition, this train station also doubles as a mall, which is a perfect example of good urban planning. From here you can actually see the quite vast expanse outwardly the mall has. It's not just confined to this narrow corridor you have on the upper balcony, but it does go into distinct wings that supply extra stores and goods for people. Also, just note the effort put into making this architecture perfect.
America can't build good public transportation.
So over here we have the path, which goes to New Jersey. And then we have multiple subway lines that connect. Beautiful marble everywhere.
Nearby to the station is a pedestrian-friendly public plaza, which is a really good thing instead of just having a straight-up street in front of it. In addition, note these ribs and how they poke out instead of just going up. It makes the building look a lot less hostile looking, instead of just having the ribs crossing each other and pointing upwards. So overall, this station and all the other infrastructure surrounding it have been a testament to how, despite the tragedies and turmoil, New York has been able to build back better and stronger than ever before. This has been quite the interesting video to make, and I try to read and reply to every comment, so if you guys have something to say, let me know. I'm the Transit Diaries, and as always, stay tuned for more.